Hi, this is my review of Destiny Quest: The Heart of Fire by Michael J. Ward. Destiny Quest is a trilogy of game books. Each book is a self contained experience. Each book is basically a role playing game with its own campaign setting. And you don't need to play book 1 and book 3 to understand book 2 or book 2 to understand the other two books. Each book is its own story, but they all share the same mythology and game world. Now, before we begin talking about the quality and the contents, let's talk a bit about the differences between a storybook and a game book, because some of you may not be familiar with them. Well, a storybook is basically a work of fiction in which you choose where your character goes, what he does, if he wants to attack this enemy, if he wants to go down that corridor, open that door, and the book is going to give you a numbered entry, and you go to that number and you see the outcome based on the action that you decided to take. Sometimes it's going to be a good outcome, other times your character could die a horrible death. It all depends on the book and your actions, etc. A game book, such as The Heart of Fire, has a higher level of interaction. You're going to have a character sheet with attributes, with special abilities and weapons and gear that you will be able to use to tackle the different challenges that you will find in your adventure. So the level of interaction makes it feel a lot like a traditional role-playing game. This book is for a single player, but there is a bit of a multiplayer element to it. I will talk a bit more about it later on in the review. Now, game books are quite interesting because about like 30 years ago they were quite popular, but in the late 80s their popularity kind of went down a bit. But now there seems to be a sort of like a renaissance. I don't know if it's too strong of a term to use it like that, but they seem to be gaining a bit more popularity. Now let's talk about the quality. The quality is very good because being a softcover book, it's actually sturdier than I would have expected it to be. I don't see this falling apart anytime soon. However, because it's a softcover book, there will be some creases after some heavy use, and it has this sort of like a plastic covering, and I don't know if you can see it right there, but as you can see it's going to peel away a bit. But other than that, the quality is great. The quality of the paper is good, the ink and the font is good, easy on the eyes as well. You have some black and white illustrations. They are basically just there for the decoration. Some of them are. Let me try to show you this page without showing you any spoilers. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, by the way, so you can enjoy this book after watching this review, and you will still be surprised by the different challenges that you will face. As you can see, this illustration, you have this little skull with a shield and sword right here. But there are other more 3D, so to speak, illustrations related to different puzzles that you will find. The puzzles are quite fun and difficult. I had trouble with some of them, but after completing them, you feel really satisfied. So, for example, here you have one of the puzzles. No spoilers, don't worry. You basically don't have a clue on what to do here yet. And you have many different illustrations related to puzzles that look really cool, like this one. Well, not as many. I would have liked to see more puzzles, because I had a lot of fun solving them. You also have this little booklet in the middle of the book that is basically like a map guide. It has all the maps in your adventure so you can move around. You have a map that is sort of like a European landscape. And you have a jungle. And this infernal looking place right here. Now, oh, I forgot, you also have this really cool looking map of the town. And a letter that is sort of like adds to the flavor, to the background of the setting. So the quality is really good, actually. Very nice. And you also have your character sheet at the start of the book. You actually have two character sheets. I'm guessing one is to photocopy and the other one, if you want to use it to write on it, it's here. But I would advise against writing on this book, because as you gain things during your adventure, it's going to you're going to be erasing a lot, and the piece of paper is going to take a toll after many writing and erasing. You also have a sample hero. I will tell you how to use this hero in a bit. Now let's talk about the contents of Destiny Quest. The book starts giving you a very nice, very clear introduction and explaining the rules. This is a very in terms of rules, it's quite simple, but that doesn't mean there isn't a tactical and strategic depth to it. In fact, I was also quite surprised that strategy and tactics have to be balanced to surpass different things. Before we get to that, let's talk about your hero. Your hero is basically a blank sheet. You have no attributes, no powers, no nothing. And as you start obtaining weapons, armor, rings, talismans, etc., you will start getting different stats. Your stats are basically health. That's the only stat you or attribute that you start with. And you also have armor, which is obviously you get more armor as you collect more armor pieces, but not always. There's actually, for example, a chest piece that has no armor whatsoever but gives you some other stat. You also have a magic, which is very useful for mages, as you can imagine. You also have brawn, which is quite useful for rogues and warriors. And you have speed, and speed is incredibly important in this game. Once you start playing this game, you really have to put some numbers into speed, because otherwise you won't be able to fight to beat many of the things that you will face in this book. I will talk a bit more about it. So that's actually quite fun in the game, that you start to put some thought into, maybe I want to create this character that deals a lot of damage, but that will you'll have to sacrifice a bit of armor to do that. But trust me, always keep speed at a priority. As I explain the combat system, you will see why. So there's a lot of choices on how to customize your character, and each piece of armor or rings, necklaces, etc., they could give you additional powers that will give you an advantage in combat. Some things have to be taken and they come at a bit of a sacrifice. So for example, maybe your character will move faster, but at the next turn you're going to have less armor, or you're going to move a bit slower, or you will take more damage. So you really have to, that's the strategy part and how you build your character. And the tactical part comes when each combat round you have to think when to activate or when a specific ability is going to trigger, and that will determine the victory in combat. You also have some checks or challenges that you will have to take according to its outcome. The outcome of the challenges are going to be based on your attributes. So for example, a speed challenge, you roll two six-sided dice, and you add your speed value to your roll, and you need to roll above a certain number, and you will succeed at the challenge. So even though if you decide to become a mage, it's always a bit wise to keep some points on brawn in case you find something that is hard to open and your magic doesn't work on it. You will have to do a brawn check, etc. And for this game, you just need probably 4 six-sided dice, because some of the abilities will allow you to roll more dice than usually needed. So I recommend that you have at least 4 or 5 six-sided dice. Now when it comes to combat, each combat round happens very quickly, at least during the first levels of the game. First, you have to do a speed check. You roll a couple of dice and add your speed value for your character and then for your opponent. The highest number is the one who gets to attack that round. And this is where speed plays a crucial part. Let's say that you have a high number of speed and you keep winning the initiative. Your enemy is not going to be able to react at all. So that's something that makes speed quite important. You could, if you roll high enough, like 3 or 4 rounds, you will probably be able to finish the battle then and there. So always keep in mind that speed is reigns supreme, and all of those abilities will give you different ways in which you can get an edge on combat, because each time that you deal damage, your opponent is going to deduct his armor from that damage, and is going to take wounds according to the difference. But there are some abilities, for example, that deal like penetrating attacks, and they will be able to go through the armor and just deal a lot of damage. There are other attacks that deal like bleed or poison damage, and your enemy is going to be suffering damage, a set amount of damage each round. But the same applies to you if you're fighting like a scorpion or a giant spider or whatever. Maybe that enemy could poison you, and you will start suffering damage each round. There are many other things that come into play, especially when you get things called careers, which feel a bit like prestige classes, more advanced versions of the mage, the thief, the rogue, and the warrior. Because a lot of those abilities make you perform extraordinary things. Maybe you roll 3 dice instead of 2 for your speed, or maybe you can confound your opponent so that when he attacks you, he misses and you counter immediately. And a lot of those abilities cannot be used all the time. Once you use them, you have to wait until the combat ends, and then they refresh. And I like the way that the wound system works. That is, you get wounded in combat, but most of the time you recover your health at the end of the battle, and that allows for a bit more of a faster experience most of the time. And you choose the place that your character is going to explore. You won't have total freedom, but you will have, let's say, total freedom at 3 different major segments of the adventure, but there will be other 3 or 4 parts that regardless of what you choose, there's a specific outcome. So it's not about getting to different places, more of like how many places do you plan to explore before getting from point A to point B. So it feels like a story arc that has a bit of a sandbox between each arc, so to speak. Now let's talk a bit about the themes of the game, the story, the legends, the color of it all. This is a book about opposites. The Heart of Fire has many things that parallel real world organizations and themes, but in a different light. And I really like how Michael J. Ward handled things in that respect, because, for example, in role-playing games such as Anima, I think they used too many real-world elements to the point that it felt somewhat unoriginal. But here, although you will be able to recognize certain things, they still feel fresh and different. You're going to see a conflict between this monastic organization and this pagan organization, and you're going to see the conflict of opposites between chaos and order, civilization and savagery or barbarism, good and evil. Everything is opposites. And by the end of the book, you're probably going to feel like your character is a bit of both things. Like your character is kind of like wielding energies from both sides of either of those factions, so to speak. And there are also many interesting interactions with individuals related to different factions. That is, you're going to find both allies and enemies in every place. And that's quite enjoyable, because it instead of just presenting a black and white world, it's sort of like a kaleidoscope of people and energies and entities, and you don't know what to expect. I also like it that you always feel in control. At least most of the time, you feel in control of the choices that you make. You get enough clues and information to think about what you're getting into. And however, something that could have been improved, in my opinion, I think this book would have benefited a lot from a silent protagonist, because sometimes you have an idea of the type of hero that you want to play, and the hero here is always thinking and talking, and sometimes it felt against the concept of that I had for that hero. So for example, I was one of my heroes, I played this book twice. One of my heroes was going to be this sort of like a very stoic and brave individual, but when the character in this book was like, please no more, oh no, it felt like it broke my entire concept down. It would have been better as a silent protagonist, in my opinion. So and another thing that I found quite well handled is that you don't need to choose a specific gender. That is, if somebody wants to play a female character, that's certainly possible. So you can let your girlfriend borrow this book or whatever, and there's nothing that indicates that your character is specifically male or female. That's quite difficult to handle sometimes, because for example, in some video games, when you have the choices of creating a male or a female character, sometimes you do notice when your character is starting to act too masculine or too feminine, in contrast to your gender, and that's a bit awkward. But here you can play it as a man or a woman, and your character is going to always feel masculine or feminine, depending on your gender. Something that you should also consider is that this book feels a lot like a video game at times, in the best of the sense of the term. So, in fact, it reminded me a lot of World of Warcraft at times. It reminds you of those MMOs. Because when you defeat enemies, you have all these different pieces of equipment and suddenly drop out of the enemy. There are going to be some explanations like, oh, you defeated that beast. Oh, near the corpse of the beast, you find these weapons, probably the remains of some adventurer. But it kind of feels like that you killed the enemy and the stuff came out flying out of the enemy, like in video games. And sometimes you won't be able to get all the treasure. You will have to pick one of the things that they give you an option to take. So that feels like, for example, in World of Warcraft, when you defeat a certain boss and you get to choose or bid on a specific item, and it's going to feel like that. Now, when it comes to the multiplayer aspect, there are some quests here that are quite hardcore, in my opinion. Some challenges where there's this monster that is just too powerful, and you will need two heroes to defeat that monster. And so if you have a friend who has another book of the Destiny Quest series, you can team up with his hero and face those challenges. And you can think, oh, that's a gimmick. That's so everybody buys a book that you have two people buy, person buy one book. But no, that's why you get the character here at the beginning, so you can team up with that character. You will have to control two characters at the same time, but the quests are doable. It's possible for you as a single player to conquer those multiplayer challenges, and they're quite difficult, in my opinion. It feels like your character really has to be geared or armed or equipped to face off against the different enemies. For example, maybe one enemy is very powerful when it comes to magic, so some abilities that could cancel out or lower the magic stat are going to be great. Now let's talk a bit more about the different paths and careers that your character can take. At the beginning, your character feels a lot like a zero level character that is quite unremarkable, but funny enough, I think that's the most fun part of the book. Later on, you become extremely powerful, and I didn't feel that much of a risk. That is not to say that it's not difficult. It is difficult. Throughout the entire book, you will find enemies that you will start fighting over and over again because they're just too tough. But thematic wise, I had more fun when it comes when my character is a bit weaker, and then your character will end up becoming a rogue, a mage, or a warrior. And later on, depending on the places that you visit or items that you find, you will be able to take careers which feel a bit more specialized. I liked some of them, but for the most part, I would have liked if the careers were a bit more impressive. Some careers feel in fact, later on in the book, in the third part, there was this career that sounded quite cool, and when I took it, I was like, that was it. I didn't use the ability. I think just I used it once, and that felt a bit underwhelming. But that's a bit more of the to the replayability of the book. You could play a mage twice and choose different careers, and it would still feel a bit different. So there's a lot of replayability when it comes to the choices, because you can choose to play as a rogue, mage, or warrior, and each of those paths are going to have different careers. And now, as to the adventure itself, I think it is a satisfying adventure. But there will be some unanswered questions which I think are answered in book 3. But it still feels like its own story. And each map has a very strong, well, it left a very strong impression on me. So for example, the first map, it feels quite European with all these stone monoliths and burrows and villages and swamps, and so at times the book feels a bit like a comedy. I would catalog it or label it as a fantasy action horror comedy. So it's a bit of a mixed genre because it has some really creepy parts at times, but then you see some really comedic elements. But there was always action and fantasy. It's very high fantasy. In fact, by the end of the book, in theme and both in rules and theme, your character is going to feel quite powerful. You're sort of like you're larger than life and beyond. Although it's a strange contrast that sometimes I also felt like he had these bursts of power, and then he again felt quite vulnerable. And in the second map, the jungle, I felt like Solomon Kane at times. You have firearms in this book. Those are some of the weapons that you can use, and I felt just like the Puritan with a touch of pagan, walking around and shooting stuff in the jungle. And in the third map, Tartarus, have you played Demon Souls or Dark Souls or Bloodborne? It felt a lot like that, and you have this mysterious place and with a civilization, and you don't know what happened to them, and you're really excited on finding out what happened in that place. Why did that place end up so horrible and nightmarish? So that felt great. I like it when it feels like you want to find out every secret about a different place. In fact, when I finished the third map, I was like, no, I want to go back and explore different things to see what happened, and that's very important. So that's quite fun. I think that the book really succeeds at building this world and having this really colorful and mysterious background. Now let's talk about what I think of the book. I think this book is a great experience and quite different from other game books. You will have to get into the mentality that at times it feels like a video game, and you cannot die in this game book. So that could also feel like a video game, like trying over and over again. That doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, if you don't choose the right place to go and find the right items, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to defeat a certain enemy. But as I was telling you, you have choices on where to go on that map. So if you can't succeed at a quest, try another thing. Try killing that legendary monster, or try attempting try to take on that other quest that seems a bit easier or a bit harder. So it's quite enjoyable on that part. The only things that I didn't like about the book is that sometimes battles take a bit too long. I enjoyed combats when it was over in just a few turns. And maybe you got defeated or your enemy got defeated. That felt a bit more intense. But later on, you have these really long battles. And, that even though you have some fun trying to pick the perfect turn and want to use this ability related to your opponent's attacks and special powers, like, oh, on this turn my opponent is going to hurt me automatically because of this effect, so now I'm going to use heal and heal me, and then I'm going to counter with this attack that deals a lot more damage. Oh, but it's going to make me slower on the next turn, but that's okay because I activated this other effect that makes my opponent slow also. So you're going to have fun on that, but I preferred shorter combats. And the fact that speed is such an important part of combat, I think that it could also it felt a bit limiting at times, because sometimes you want to create like a character that's sort of like a brute or a wizard with a lot of magic, and you always feel like but I need to be quick, and it felt like you were a bit forced to have a specific build. But other than that, this game book provides a rich story, a lot of options, both in strategy and tactics. The entire plotline made sense, and it has that campy feel to it, so it kind of sort of like a tongue-in-cheek. But as I was telling you, I really like how they handle the contrast between different organizations and powers. So, for example, I'm going to tell you a bit of what it says on the back of the book. Your character is basically this prophet, and you start trapped in a dungeon of the Inquisition, but then the story moves on, and you start unraveling some bigger plot, or let's call it like a conspiracy going behind everything, and all the people involved are not aware of it. So that's very engaging, and it develops the entire campaign in surprising ways. In fact, I don't think you will be able to recognize your character by the end of the book. Many changes are going to happen, and you're going to have your say in the course of the events. But remember, this is a story arc, so there will be some points on the adventure that will be kind of fixed. But the important thing, as I tell you, is the journey, not so much the end when it comes to this book, The Heart of Fire. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.